Have you ever wondered how many lives can change with a single act of unexpected kindness? On a freezing morning in Boston, a woman enters a corner bakery with her young son and whispers a question that shatters the heart of everyone who hears it. What she doesn't know is that a man watches from the shadows. A man whose decision in that instant will unleash something none of them could have imagined. Stay until the end, because this story will prove to you that the most beautiful miracles are born where we least expect them. The bitter cold of the Boston dawn cut like a blade when Catherine pushed open the glass door of Sullivan's Bakery on Tremont Street. Her hands trembled not only from the frigid temperature, but from the shame that burned in her chest like hot coals. Oliver, her 9-year-old son, walked pressed against her side, clinging to the worn fabric of his mother's coat, as if it were the only real thing in a world that had turned its back on them. The aroma of fresh-baked bread hit them like a cruel reminder of everything they had lost. They had been sleeping in shelters and doorways for 4 months, ever since Catherine lost her position as a library assistant and the small apartment they rented was taken from them when she could no longer make payments. Each day was a battle against hunger, against fear, against the crushing guilt of not being able to give her child what he deserved. That morning, after watching Oliver refuse the last piece of stale bagel because he knew it was all they had, Catherine made the most difficult decision of her life. She would enter that bakery and do something she never thought she would do. She would beg for scraps, swallow her pride completely if it meant seeing her son eat something warm and fresh. Her heart pounded so hard she felt certain everyone in the bakery could hear it echoing off the tiled walls. She took a deep breath and approached the counter with uncertain steps, her worn shoes squeaking slightly on the clean floor. The woman behind the counter, middle-aged with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked at her with a neutral expression while arranging croissants and rolls in the glass display case. Catherine cleared her throat, feeling the words stick in her throat like jagged stones. Oliver squeezed the fabric of her coat tighter, and Catherine could feel her son's small trembling body against her leg. She swallowed hard, lowered her gaze to the white ceramic floor tiles, and finally whispered in a barely audible voice, "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you have any old bread left over? Anything you were going to throw away? It's for my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine didn't dare lift her eyes, but she could feel the stares of other customers drilling into her back like hot needles piercing skin. The woman behind the counter frowned, not with cruelty exactly, but with that practical indifference of someone who has seen too much misery to be moved by every instance. "Look, lady, we don't give things away here. Everything is for sale," she responded in a dry tone while continuing to arrange the merchandise with mechanical efficiency. Catherine felt the earth open beneath her feet. She had humiliated her dignity for nothing. Oliver lifted his large blue eyes toward his mother, and in that childish gaze there was a devastating mixture of hunger, exhaustion, and an understanding far too mature for his 9 years. The boy didn't cry, didn't protest, simply lowered his head and pressed his lips together. What neither of them knew is that someone else had heard every word of that painful exchange. Marcus Brennan was seated at a table in the back of the small cafe area attached to the bakery, with a cup of steaming coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched in the last 20 minutes. He was 41 years old, owner of a successful chain of boutique hotels across New England, and that morning he had gone out to walk without direction, trying to escape the emptiness that had been pursuing him for years. His business success was undeniable, his bank account enviable, but his personal life was an emotional desert where nothing bloomed. Without close family, without a partner, without real friends beyond business associates, Marcus had learned to live in a solitude he disguised as comfort and independence. But something in the broken voice of that woman and the hungry eyes of that child pierced through the walls he had built around his heart. He set the cup down on the table carefully, watching as Catherine took Oliver's hand and headed toward the exit with shoulders slumped and defeat painted in every step. He didn't think twice. He stood from his seat and walked directly toward the counter with purpose in his stride. "Good morning," Marcus said to the woman behind the counter with a polite smile he had perfected in thousands of business meetings. He pulled his leather wallet from the pocket of his wool coat and gestured toward the variety of baked goods. "I'll take 6 croissants, 4 Danish pastries, a dozen rolls, and 2 apple turnovers, please. Everything fresh." The woman nodded efficiently and began packing everything in white paper bags while Marcus paid in cash and left a generous tip that made her eyebrows rise slightly. But instead of taking the bags and leaving, he stood there for a moment, looking toward the glass door where Catherine and Oliver had just exited. He could see them through the window, walking slowly along the sidewalk. the boy still clinging to his mother, the two small figures against the grey dawn of Boston. Something inside him moved, an urgency he hadn't felt in years, perhaps never. He took the bags and exited the bakery with quick steps, but without running. He didn't want to frighten them. He caught up with them half a block later, just as Catherine stopped at a corner trying to decide where to go, where to flee from the humiliation that still burned her cheeks. Marcus took a deep breath and approached from the side where Oliver was walking. "Excuse me," he said with a soft voice, crouching down a bit to be at the boy's height. Oliver turned with enormous, distrustful eyes, pressing closer against his mother. Catherine immediately spun around, instinctively placing herself between the stranger and her son, her body tense like that of a cornered animal ready to defend its young. But when she saw the kind expression on Marcus's face and the bags of bread he was extending toward them, confusion replaced fear. "I bought way too much bread and I won't be able to eat it all," Marcus lied naturally, maintaining a calm smile. "Would you do me the favor of taking this? It would be a shame for it to go to waste." He extended the bags directly toward Oliver as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The boy looked at his mother seeking permission, and Catherine, with tears accumulating in her eyes, barely nodded. Oliver took the bags with his small, dirty hands, and the weight of the fresh bread almost made him stumble backward. Marcus straightened up. He avoided looking directly at Catherine because he intuited that the woman was on the verge of breaking, and he simply said, "Have a nice day." He turned and walked away before they could respond, leaving behind the aroma of bread and the silent sound of two broken hearts beginning to repair themselves. Catherine hugged her son while tears finally rolled down her cheeks, not knowing that this man had just changed the course of their lives forever. Oliver buried his nose in one of the paper bags and inhaled deeply, as if he wanted to fill his lungs not just with air, but with the sweet and comforting aroma of fresh baked bread. His blue eyes lit up with a spark that Catherine hadn't seen in months. That childish light that hunger and the street had been extinguishing day by day, moment by moment. "Mom, it smells so good," as the boy whispered with reverence, as if he were holding an invaluable treasure between his arms. Catherine quickly wiped the tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself, although her chest still heaved with contained emotion. She looked around searching for the mysterious man, but he had already turned the corner and disappeared among the streets that were beginning to awaken with the morning bustle of Boston. Who was that stranger? Why had he done something like that? In her recent experience, people averted their eyes when they saw her asking for help on corners, crossed the street to avoid her, shouted at her to get a job as if she hadn't tried 100 times. But this man, with his simple but evidently quality clothing, his serene face and that gaze that carried no judgment or pity, only pure humanity, had done something no one else had bothered to do. He had seen them, truly seen them. Not as problems or statistics, but as people. They walked to a small park that Catherine knew well, a place where they had slept several nights under a large oak tree that offered them some shade and protection from the elements. They sat on a worn wooden bench, and Catherine opened one of the bags with trembling hands. The bread was still warm, soft to the touch, and when she broke a croissant into 2 pieces, the buttery layers separated delicately under her fingers. She gave the larger half to Oliver, and the boy took it carefully, almost afraid that it was a dream that would vanish if he bit too quickly. When he finally did, his eyes closed in pure pleasure and a small sound of happiness escaped his throat. Catherine felt her heart break and repair itself at the same time. She ate her piece slowly, savoring each bite, not only for the hunger it satisfied, but for what it represented. Dignity returned, hope restored, proof that there were still angels walking the streets of this city. Oliver devoured his half and reached for a roll, biting into it with the urgency of someone who has known the emptiness of the stomach too intimately. Catherine had to remind him to eat slowly so he wouldn't get sick. While they had breakfast, Catherine couldn't stop thinking about the stranger, about his simple but monumental gesture. A few blocks from there, Marcus Brennan walked back to his car parked near the bakery, but his thoughts were completely fixed on the image of that mother and son. He couldn't get out of his head the boy's eyes, that mixture of hunger and resignation that no child should ever know, nor the broken voice of the mother asking for scraps, not for herself but for her child, willing to swallow any humiliation to feed him. Marcus had grown up in an upper middle-class family where he never lacked anything. He built his empire from the ground up, with hard work and intelligent decisions, but always from a position of security. He had never experienced that visceral desperation of not knowing where the next meal would come from. He got into his car but didn't start the engine immediately. He sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, feeling a strange restlessness in his chest. He had made donations before, written checks for charitable organizations, sponsored charity events, but always from the comfortable distance that money allows. This had been different. He had looked directly into the eyes of suffering and had acted not out of social obligation or tax benefit, but from a basic human impulse he thought he had lost somewhere along the road to success. He finally started the engine and drove toward his office in Back Bay, but his mind remained on that corner, in that park where he imagined the mother and son sharing the bread he had given them. Throughout the entire morning meeting with his managers, he was distracted. He nodded at the right moments and signed the necessary documents, but a part of him remained absent. His assistant, an efficient woman in her 50s named Patricia, noticed and asked if he felt well. Marcus responded yes with an automatic smile, but it was a lie. He didn't feel well. He felt stirred up as if something dormant inside him had awakened violently. During lunch, sitting alone in his office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River, he didn't even touch the salad Patricia had ordered for him. Instead, he found himself thinking about all the times he had passed by people experiencing homelessness without really seeing them. All the times he had rationalized his indifference with the argument that he couldn't help everyone, that social problems were the government's responsibility, that he was already doing his part by paying taxes and generating employment. Suddenly, all those justifications sounded hollow and self-serving. He pulled out his phone and, on an impulse he didn't fully understand, searched for information about shelters and community kitchens in Boston. The day passed slowly and quickly at the same time, a temporal contradiction that Marcus experienced whenever something important occupied his mind. When he finally left the office around 7 in the evening, instead of driving straight to his home in Cambridge, a modern and minimalist loft that looked more like a hotel than a home, he took a detour. Without consciously planning it, he found himself driving back toward downtown, toward the area where Sullivan's Bakery was located. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for. Was he hoping to find them again? Did he want to make sure they were okay? Logic told him it was ridiculous, that Boston was a city of millions of people and the odds of a second chance encounter were minimal. But something stronger than logic pushed him forward. He drove past the bakery, already closed at that hour, and continued driving through the surrounding streets with his eyes alert. He saw several homeless individuals on different corners, each with their own story of fall and survival. But he didn't see Catherine or Oliver. Finally, when the sky turned that orange and purple tone that announces the end of the day, Marcus accepted reality and drove toward his home. But as he drove along the Mass Pike, an inexplicable certainty settled in his chest. This would not be the last encounter. Destiny had barely begun to weave its invisible threads. 3 days later, Marcus was leaving a meeting with investors in a corporate tower downtown when he received a call that made him frown. It was his accountant, notifying him about some documents that needed urgent signatures at a notary's office located near Beacon Hill. He hung up with a sigh of resignation. He told his driver he could leave for the day, that he would walk back. He needed to clear his mind. The afternoon was cool, one of those Boston afternoons where the sky is painted in pastel tones and the air smells like blooming magnolias from the public garden. He signed the papers in less than 20 minutes and walked out onto the street with his hands in his pockets, enjoying the urban bustle around him. He walked without a fixed direction, letting his feet guide him while his mind processed numbers, contracts, and growth projections. But when he turned a corner that led to a small plaza surrounded by tall trees, all that mental machinery stopped dead. There, collapsed on the concrete ground next to a dry fountain, was Catherine, unconscious. Oliver, kneeling beside her, desperately shook his mother's shoulder while tears rolled down his dirty cheeks. "Mom, Mom, wake up," the boy cried with a voice that broke the soul. Marcus's heart accelerated violently and his legs moved before his brain could fully process the scene. He ran toward them, dodging passers-by, who glanced but kept walking. That urban indifference that turns others' suffering into ignorable scenery. He arrived next to Oliver and knelt on the other side of Catherine, his dress pants touching the dirty ground without him caring. "What happened, buddy?" he asked with a firm but gentle voice, trying to maintain calm so as not to frighten the boy further. Oliver looked at him with enormous, terrified eyes, and for a second he seemed not to recognize him. But then something in his memory clicked. "You're the man from the bread," he exclaimed between sobs. "My mom, we were walking and suddenly she fell and she won't wake up and I don't know what to do and I'm so scared." The words tumbled out of his mouth while his small hands continued shaking Catherine. Marcus placed 2 fingers on the woman's neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. Her skin burned with fever and her breathing was shallow. There was no time to waste. He pulled out his phone and dialed directly to emergency services, while with his other hand he tried to position Catherine in a safer position. "This is Marcus Brennan. I need an ambulance urgently at Winthrop Square, corner of Devonshire Street. A woman, approximately 35 years old, unconscious with high fever," he said with authority while the operator asked questions on the other end of the line. He answered everything mechanically, giving precise details about Catherine's condition and the exact location, but his eyes didn't leave the woman's pale face, nor the tears that continued falling down Oliver's cheeks. When he hung up, he took off his suit jacket and placed it under Catherine's head as an improvised pillow. Oliver watched him with a mixture of hope and paralyzing fear, clinging to his mother's limp hand as if letting go meant losing her forever. Marcus extended a hand toward the boy, and Oliver, without hesitation this time, took it with force. "The ambulance is coming. Your mom is going to be okay. I promise you," he said, although he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. But he needed the boy to believe in something, to hold on to hope in the midst of chaos. The minutes that followed were eternal. Marcus spoke to Catherine with a soft voice, telling her to resist, that her son needed her, although he didn't know if she could hear him. Oliver trembled completely against his side and Marcus wrapped an arm around him protectively. Finally, the ambulance siren cut through the air and 2 paramedics jumped out with a stretcher and medical equipment. Marcus stepped aside to give them space but kept Oliver close to him, the boy practically hidden in his arms while he watched in horror as the paramedics checked his mother, put an oxygen mask on her, and inserted an IV with quick professional movements. "Are you family of the patient?" asked one of the paramedics while they prepared the stretcher. Marcus opened his mouth to say no, that he barely knew this woman, that he was just a stranger who had run into them twice by chance. But when he felt Oliver squeeze his hand with desperate force and look at him with eyes that begged him not to abandon them, the words that came out of his mouth were different. "Yes, I'm coming with you." The paramedic nodded without asking more questions, too busy stabilizing Catherine to inquire into family details. Together they lifted the woman's inert body and placed her on the stretcher. Marcus picked up Oliver in his arms. The boy was light as a feather, much lighter than a 9-year-old boy should be, and climbed with him into the ambulance. The doors closed with a metallic thud and the vehicle started at full speed with sirens wailing. Inside the ambulance, the reduced space vibrated with contained urgency. The paramedic who was in back with them constantly checked Catherine's vital signs while speaking by radio with the hospital, using medical terms that Marcus didn't fully understand, but that sounded grave. Oliver was sitting on Marcus's lap, his small body rigid with tension, his gaze fixed on his mother's pale face connected to cables and tubes. "Is my mom going to die?" the boy whispered with a voice so small it was barely heard over the noise of the engine and sirens. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. He hugged the child tighter and rested his chin on top of Oliver's head. "Nobody. Your mom is very strong, and the doctors at the hospital are going to take very good care of her," he responded with a conviction he didn't feel but needed to project. Oliver nodded against his chest but didn't stop trembling. Marcus looked through the small rear window of the ambulance, seeing the city pass by in a blur at high speed, and he realized that in a matter of minutes his ordered and solitary life had been invaded by the beautiful and terrifying chaos of caring about someone else, of caring about 2 people who technically were strangers but no longer felt like such. When the ambulance screeched into the emergency area of Massachusetts General Hospital, Marcus knew he had crossed the point of no return. The automatic doors of the emergency area opened with a hydraulic hiss and a complete medical team came out to receive the stretcher as if it were a choreography rehearsed 1,000 times. Nurses in blue scrubs, resident doctors in white coats, all converged around Catherine while the paramedic gave the quick report. Female, approximately 35 years old, found unconscious. Temperature of 103 degrees, low blood pressure, signs of severe dehydration and possible malnutrition. The words fell like stones on Marcus as he got out of the ambulance still carrying Oliver. A nurse with short hair and an efficient expression approached them with an electronic tablet in her hands. "Are you family of the patient?" she asked in a professional neutral tone. Marcus hesitated only a second before responding. "I'm her partner." He lied without blinking because he knew that if he told the truth they wouldn't let him through, wouldn't give him information, and somehow inexplicably he felt he had to be there. The nurse nodded and began asking questions. Patient's full name, age, medical history, known allergies, medications she was taking. Marcus didn't know almost anything. Only the name he had heard Oliver say, Catherine Morris. The rest he improvised or admitted ignorance, blaming the state of shock. The nurse looked at him with some suspicion, but the chaos of emergencies didn't allow time for deep interrogations. You'll need to fill out these forms in admissions while we stabilize Mrs. Morris. The boy can stay with you in the waiting room. She pointed toward a glass door that led to a room full of orange plastic chairs where other families waited with expressions of anguish and exhaustion. Marcus nodded and began walking in that direction, but Oliver twisted in his arms, stretching his small hands toward where they were taking his mother down a long white hallway. "Mom, don't take her. Mom," he cried desperately, struggling to get down. Marcus held him firmly but tenderly, his voice an anchor in the middle of the storm. "Easy, buddy. The doctors need to help her, and we can't be in there right now, but we're going to stay right here close by waiting for her. Okay?" Oliver looked at him with fresh tears rolling down his cheeks and finally stopped fighting, sinking against Marcus's chest as if all his energy had been exhausted at once. Marcus carried him to the waiting room and sat in one of the chairs. The boy curled in his lap, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Brennan experienced the crushing weight of feeling completely powerless. Time in a hospital waiting room doesn't behave like normal time. Minutes stretch like taffy. Each second is an eternity of dark thoughts and worst-case scenarios. Marcus filled out the forms with the little information he had, leaving blank spaces where there should be medical history, names of relatives, permanent addresses. When he reached the section on health insurance, he wrote a simple note, "All expenses covered by Marcus Brennan," and added his phone number. The admissions receptionist, an older woman with glasses hanging from a golden chain, raised her eyebrows when she read that, but made no comments. She simply processed the papers and told him to wait. He returned to Oliver, who had gone quiet in the chair, his little legs dangling without reaching the floor, his gaze lost at some point on the wall full of posters about vaccination and disease prevention. Marcus sat next to him and, without thinking much about it, put an arm around the boy's shoulders. Oliver immediately leaned against him, seeking the warmth and solidity of an adult to lean on. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked gently. Oliver shook his head no, although his stomach chose that exact moment to growl loudly. Marcus almost smiled at the contradiction but restrained himself. He got up, told Oliver he would be back in 2 minutes, and walked to the vending machines he had seen in the hallway. He bought apple juice, crackers, a packaged sandwich, and chocolate bars. When he returned, Oliver was still in the same position, like a little statue of salt. Marcus offered him the juice first, and the boy took it with trembling hands. He drank a small sip and then a bigger one, as if suddenly his body remembered it needed fuel. Marcus unwrapped the turkey and cheese sandwich and put it in Oliver's hands. "Eat slowly or you'll get sick," he said softly. Oliver obeyed, biting small pieces, chewing carefully. While the boy ate, Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Patricia, canceling all his meetings for the next day. He gave no explanations. Then he sat staring at the screen, debating whether to call someone, if he needed to talk to someone about what was happening. But there was no one. That realization hit him with brutal clarity. He had business contacts, acquaintances, employees, but no one to call in a personal crisis, no one who would ask how he was or what he needed. He put away his phone and returned his attention to Oliver, who had finished half the sandwich and was looking at him with enormous eyes. "Thank you, sir," the boy murmured with a voice hoarse from so much crying. An hour passed, then 2. The waiting room filled and emptied in unpredictable cycles. One family received good news and left crying with joy. Another received devastating news and collapsed in a collective embrace of pain. Marcus observed all this as if it were a window into a dimension where human emotions were lived with maximum intensity, without the filters and masks he had perfected in his business world. Oliver eventually fell asleep against his side, exhausted physically and emotionally. Marcus didn't move so as not to wake him, although his arm began to go numb and his back protested the uncomfortable position. Finally, when the clock on the wall marked 11 at night, a young doctor with a high ponytail and pronounced dark circles came out through the emergency doors. "Family of Catherine Morris?" she called, looking around the room. Marcus raised his free hand, trying not to wake Oliver. The doctor approached with a folder under her arm, and her expression was serious but not catastrophic, that middle ground that Marcus didn't know how to interpret. "Are you Marcus Brennan?" she asked, checking her notes. He nodded, his heart beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. We need to talk about Catherine's condition, and things are more complicated than we initially thought. Marcus stood carefully, adjusting Oliver in his arms so as not to wake him, and followed the doctor toward a more private corner of the waiting room where they could talk without other families overhearing. The doctor introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Chen, specialist in internal medicine, and her face showed that professional mixture of compassion and frankness that only experienced doctors know how to balance. Your partner arrived in a critical state of dehydration and severe malnutrition. She also presents anemia, hypotension, and what appears to be the beginning of a respiratory infection, she explained with a clear but soft voice, conscious of the boy sleeping in Marcus's arms. We've administered intravenous fluids, antibiotics, and we're monitoring her vital signs constantly. She's stable now, but she needs to remain hospitalized at least 4 or 5 days for recovery and observation. Marcus nodded, processing each word while feeling Oliver's weight against his chest. The doctor continued, "May I ask how long they've been without regular access to food and clean water?" The question had no judgment, only genuine medical concern. Marcus looked down at Oliver and felt a knot in his throat. "They've been experiencing homelessness for some months," he admitted in a low voice. The doctor closed her eyes for a moment, as if that confirmation hurt personally, and then nodded. "I understand. We're going to make sure she receives complete treatment. Would you like to see your partner?" Marcus followed Dr. Chen down a hallway illuminated with fluorescent lights that hummed softly, passing doors of rooms where monitors beeped and muffled voices of nurses on their night rounds could be heard. They arrived at a small room with 2 beds separated by a green curtain. Catherine was in the bed next to the window, connected to an IV bag hanging from a metal pole, with cables stuck to her chest that connected to a heart monitor. Her face was still pale but no longer had that terrifying grayish tone from the plaza. She breathed deeply and evenly, sunk in a deep sleep induced by extreme exhaustion and probably some sedation. Marcus approached slowly, as if afraid to break the fragility of the moment. A nurse who was checking the monitor offered to bring a chair, and he accepted gratefully. He sat next to the bed, still holding Oliver, not really knowing what to do with his own hands. He looked at Catherine's sleeping face, the lines of worry that stress and suffering had carved around her eyes and mouth, and he wondered what stories those premature wrinkles hid. What dreams she had had before life pushed her to the streets. What she would have been in a more just world. The hours passed in a silence broken only by the rhythmic beeps of the monitor and the occasional sound of medication carts passing through the hallway. Marcus stayed there, motionless as a guardian, with Oliver asleep in his lap and his gaze fixed on Catherine. At some point near 3 in the morning, a nurse brought him a thin blanket and a small pillow, and with a maternal voice suggested he try to rest a little. Marcus thanked her but couldn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. What was he doing there? Why did he feel responsible for 2 people he barely knew? Was it pity, class guilt, or something deeper he didn't dare name? When the first rays of sun began to filter through the window, tinting the room in golden tones, Catherine began to move. First, just a tremor in her eyelids, then her fingers contracted slightly, and finally her eyes opened slowly, confused and disoriented. She looked at the white ceiling, then at the monitor next to her bed, then at the IV in her arm. Panic began to take over her expression. "Oliver," she whispered with a hoarse, raspy voice. "Where is my son?" She tried to sit up, but her weak body protested. Marcus immediately stood, adjusting Oliver in one arm and using the other hand to make a calming gesture. "He's here. He's okay. He's with me," he said softly. Catherine turned her head abruptly toward the voice and her eyes met Marcus's. For a moment she didn't recognize him, still trapped in that fog that prolonged unconsciousness leaves. But then her brain made the necessary connections and her expression went from confusion to recognition, from recognition to absolute shame. She saw her son asleep in the arms of the man who had given them bread days ago. The same man who somehow had ended up here in this hospital, taking care of them as if he had some obligation to do so. Tears sprouted instantly and silently, rolling down her temples toward the pillow. She tried to turn her face so he wouldn't see them, to hide her humiliation, but it was impossible to hide something like that in such a small space. "Please don't cry," Marcus said with a gentleness that surprised them both. He moved closer to the bed. Oliver began to stir in his arms, waking slowly. Catherine closed her eyes tightly, as if she could disappear if she didn't see the reality in front of her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered barely. "You had no obligation, you didn't have to. God, I don't even know your name and you're here with my son as if..." Her voice broke and she couldn't continue. Marcus swallowed, feeling the weight of that moment. "My name is Marcus," he said simply. "And there's nothing to apologize for." Oliver opened his eyes completely at that instant, disoriented for a second, until he saw his mother awake in the bed. "Mom!" he cried with joy and relief mixed, twisting to get down from Marcus's arms. Marcus lowered him carefully, and the boy ran the 2 steps separating him from the bed, trying to climb up. Marcus helped him get up, making sure not to pull any cable or tube. Oliver curled against his mother's side, hugging her with all the strength his small body could muster. "I thought you were going to die, Mom. I thought I was going to lose you," he sobbed against the hospital gown. The mother wrapped her son with the arm that didn't have the IV, kissing his head over and over, whispering promises that she was okay, that she wasn't going anywhere, that she would always be with him. Marcus watched the scene from his position next to the bed and felt something expand in his chest, a tenderness so intense it almost hurt physically. Catherine lifted her gaze toward him over Oliver's head, and her eyes, still wet with tears, met Marcus's. In that look, there were 1,000 words that didn't need to be spoken. Gratitude, shame, wonder, fear, hope, all mixed in a human expression so raw and honest that Marcus had to look away for a moment to compose himself. When he looked back at her, Catherine whispered 2 words that would change everything. "Why us?" Marcus didn't have a prepared answer for that question. He stood there with his hands in the pockets of his wrinkled pants, his jacket thrown somewhere in the room, 2 days' stubble beginning to itch, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to be completely honest, without the layers of corporate responses and emotional distance that usually protected him. "I don't know," Marcus finally admitted, his voice barely a hoarse whisper of exhaustion. "I saw what happened at the bakery and something inside me broke. I saw your son hungry and you willing to swallow any humiliation for him, and I thought that if I didn't do something, if I let that moment pass without acting, I would become part of the problem, part of everything that's wrong in this world." He paused, searching for the right words, and when he found them, his voice became firmer. "And then I found you in that plaza. When I saw Oliver trying to wake you, terrified and completely alone, it wasn't a logical decision to come here. It was the only right thing I could do." Catherine watched him with wide eyes, as if she were seeing a mythological creature, something that shouldn't exist in her reality. "I don't know you," she said softly, "and you don't know us. You have no reason to care what happens to us." Marcus sat slowly in the chair next to the bed and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're right, we don't know each other," Marcus agreed. "But maybe that makes it more real, doesn't it? I'm not helping you because I owe you something or because I expect something in return. I'm doing it because when I saw you, when I truly saw you, I couldn't do anything else." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair and sighed. "Look, I've spent the last 15 years building businesses, accumulating money, living in a loft that looks more like a museum than a home. I have everything that's supposed to make me happy by any social standard, but I'm completely empty. And then you appear in my path at the most vulnerable moment of your lives, and suddenly I feel something I hadn't felt in years." Catherine swallowed, processing his words, while her fingers absent-mindedly caressed Oliver's tangled hair as the boy remained curled against her. "What do you feel?" she asked in a low voice, almost afraid of the answer. Marcus looked directly into her eyes without hiding behind any mask. "That I matter. That my presence here makes a real difference in someone's life. That I'm not just a man signing contracts and writing checks." Catherine covered her face with her free hand, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs that had been contained for months of survival where crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Marcus moved closer and awkwardly wrapped his arms around her. With no experience in this type of emotional intimacy but guiding himself purely by instinct, she collapsed against his chest, letting out all the fear, exhaustion, hopelessness, and now this terrifying hope that opened like a flower in her bruised heart. He held her, one hand stroking her back in slow circles, the other in her hair, and he felt something inside him settle into place, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their correct fit. "You're not alone," he murmured against her hair. "You're not alone anymore." Oliver looked up from his drawing at that moment and smiled, seeing his mother embraced by Marcus. And with the simple logic of children who see the world clearer than adults, he said, "Look, just like in my drawing. We're a family." The child's words floated in the air like a prophecy, And neither Marcus nor Catherine corrected him because maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what they were becoming. And that possibility, as terrifying as it was beautiful, changed the very air they breathed in that hospital room. If you've ever felt invisible in your darkest moment, if you've ever wondered whether kindness still exists in this world, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Because stories like these remind us that we're all one moment away from being either the person who needs help or the person who can offer it. The fourth day dawned with news Marcus had been both waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Doctor. Chen entered during morning rounds with a professional smile and Catherine's folder in her hands. "Good morning, family," she greeted, and none of the three corrected the assumption. "I have good news, Catherine. Your blood tests have improved significantly. Your hydration is stable, the fever has disappeared completely, and your vital signs are in normal ranges. I think we can discharge you tomorrow morning." Oliver jumped with joy on the bed, bouncing with the recovered energy of a well-fed and rested boy. Catherine smiled, but Marcus noticed how her fingers tensed around the sheet, anxiety filtering through the mask of relief. The doctor continued giving instructions. She would need to take vitamin supplements, maintain a balanced diet, avoid intense physical efforts for the next 2 weeks, and return for a checkup in 10 days. "The social worker will come this afternoon to talk about available resources and make sure you have a stable place to go," Dr. Chen added, looking specifically at Marcus. He nodded firmly. "That's covered, doctor. They have a home waiting for them." The doctor studied his face for a moment, nodded satisfied, and left to continue her rounds. When the door closed behind her, the silence in the room became heavy. Catherine looked at Marcus with eyes full of uncertainty. "Marcus, we need to talk about this seriously. I can't just move into your home as if nothing. What will your friends think, your business partners, people who know you? A homeless woman with a child suddenly appearing in your life." Marcus stood from his chair and approached the window, hands in his pockets, jaw tense not with anger but with determination. "I don't care what others think," he said with a firm voice. "I've spent too many years of my life making decisions based on what was appropriate, convenient, expected. And you know where that led me. To a completely alone life where the only value I had was the number in my bank account." He turned to look at her directly. "For the first time in years, I'm doing something because my heart asks me to, not because my head calculates it. And my heart says you belong in my life." Catherine swallowed, fighting against tears that seemed to have no end these days. "But Marcus, I have nothing to offer you. I don't have money, I don't have a job. I'm a mess of a person who..." He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her face in his hands. "You're not a mess," he said with an intensity that made her fall silent instantly. "You're a mother who did everything humanly possible to protect her son. You're a woman who maintained her dignity even when the world tried to take it from you. You're brave, strong, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with material things." His thumbs wiped tears from her cheeks with tenderness. "And you offer me something no amount of money can buy. You offer me purpose, connection, the opportunity to be part of something real. You return the humanity I'd lost somewhere along the way." Catherine closed her eyes, letting his words penetrate the layers of insecurity she had built. When she opened them again, there was new determination in her gaze. "I need you to understand something," she said with a trembling but firm voice. "If I'm going to do this, if we're going to do this, I don't want to be your charity project. I need to find work. I need to contribute. I need to recover my independence. Because if I don't, I'll always feel like I'm in debt to you, and that would eventually destroy anything good we could build." Marcus nodded slowly, respecting her need for autonomy. "I understand perfectly, and I'll help you find work. I can make some calls. I have contacts in..." Catherine interrupted him gently. "No special favors. I want to get it on my own merits." Marcus smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated his normally serious face. "You're stubborn," he commented with affection. "I like that. Okay, no special favors, but I will help you with your resume, with appropriate clothes for interviews, with whatever you need within reason." He extended his hand formally, as if they were closing a business deal. Catherine looked at his extended hand and then his face, and for the first time in days, a small but real smile curved her lips. She took his hand and shook it. "Deal." Oliver, who had been observing the exchange with enormous eyes trying to understand adult complexities, clapped enthusiastically. "Does that mean we're going to live in a real house with beds and everything?" Marcus crouched next to the bed to be at the boy's height. Yes, buddy, with beds, with your own room, with toys and books and everything a boy needs. Oliver's eyes filled with tears of pure happiness. And you're going to be there too? Marcus looked at Catherine, seeking permission before responding. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, I'm going to be there too, Marcus promised. Oliver launched himself into his arms with such force he almost knocked him backward, and Marcus hugged him tight, feeling the child's little heart beating against his chest like a bird. The afternoon passed in a mixture of practical planning and stolen moments of tenderness. The social worker came as the doctor had promised, a serious woman in her 50s named Rebecca, who listened attentively while Marcus explained the situation. She took notes, asked direct questions about their relationship, about his intentions, about the stability of the arrangement. Marcus responded to everything with absolute honesty, without embellishing or minimizing. Rebecca studied him with eyes that had seen too many complicated situations, too many broken promises. Mr. Brennan, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need you to understand that this family is vulnerable. Catherine has gone through significant trauma. Oliver is at a critical formative age. If you're going to commit to this, it needs to be long-term, not just a temporary impulse of kindness. Marcus held her gaze without blinking. It's not temporary and it's not kindness. It's finding something I didn't know I was looking for. Rebecca nodded slowly, wrote something in her folder, and finally handed them brochures about community resources, support lines, and assistance programs in case they needed them in the future. When she left, Catherine let out a long sigh she had been holding. It's real, she whispered. This is really happening. Marcus took her hand and squeezed it gently. Yes, it's happening. And tomorrow begins the rest of our lives together, however that ends up looking. The morning of discharge dawned with clear skies over Boston, one of those days where the sun shines intensely, but the air still retains some freshness. Marcus arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, bringing new clothes for Catherine and Oliver, simple but nice garments he had purchased the day before with the help of a patient saleswoman who explained sizes and styles. Catherine dressed behind the curtain in the room, and when she emerged wearing a burgundy dress and a beige cardigan, her freshly washed hair falling in waves over her shoulders, Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. She looked beautiful, not with the artificial beauty of the women he used to cross paths with at social events, but with genuine beauty that came from strength, from survival, from recovered hope. "Do I look okay?" she asked with insecurity, smoothing the dress with nervous hands. Marcus had to clear his throat before he could speak. "You look beautiful," he said with absolute honesty, and the blush that colored Catherine's cheeks made him smile. Oliver came running out of the bathroom in his new navy blue outfit, spinning to make the fabric move. "Look, I'm like a superhero," he declared with pure joy. The nurse who entered to do the final vital signs check smiled at the scene. "What a beautiful family," she commented without malice, only with human warmth. This time none of the three corrected her. The discharge procedures took almost an hour. Signatures on documents, final instructions from Dr. Chen, prescriptions for the vitamins and medications Catherine would need, a follow-up appointment scheduled for next week. Marcus handled everything with efficiency, paying the hospital bills without blinking at the figures that would have ruined most families. When they finally walked toward the exit, Catherine carrying Oliver's hand and Marcus carrying a small bag with the belongings they had accumulated during the stay, there was a surreal sensation in the air. Catherine stopped just before crossing the automatic glass doors that would separate them from the hospital and the chapter that closed there. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a low voice, squeezing Oliver's hand. Marcus stopped beside her and followed her gaze toward the parking lot where his car waited, toward the real world that awaited them with all its complexities and uncertainties. "Me too," he confessed, surprising her with his honesty. "I have no idea how to do this, how to be what you both need. I've never been a father, never shared my space with anyone, never felt for someone what I'm beginning to feel for you." The last words came out almost in a whisper, a confession he had been containing because it seemed too soon, too complicated, too real. Catherine turned her face toward him and her brown eyes shone with unshed tears and something else, something warm and terrifying and beautiful. "Marcus," she said his name like a prayer, like she was testing how it sounded in her mouth with this new weight of meaning. "I don't know how to do this either. A week ago I was begging for bread on the streets, convinced the world had forgotten we existed. And now you're here, offering us everything. It's overwhelming. It's terrifying. And what I feel when you look at me like that, when I hear your voice, when I think about what we could become, She paused, searching for courage somewhere deep in her being. It scares me because I thought I had forgotten how to feel anything beyond fear and desperation. But you remind me that I'm still a woman, not just a mother surviving. You remind me that I deserve tenderness, that I deserve to be seen, that I deserve... Her voice broke and a tear finally escaped, rolling down her cheek. Marcus lifted his hand and wiped it away with his thumb, a gesture so intimate that both felt the change in the air between them. You deserve the whole world, he finished for her. And although I can't give you everything, I want to spend the rest of my life trying. Oliver looked at them both with a wise smile that only children possess, that capacity to see the simple truth behind adult complications. Are you going to kiss like in the movies? He asked with innocent curiosity. Marcus and Catherine looked at each other, surprised by the direct question, and both let out a nervous laugh that broke the tension of the moment. Maybe someday, buddy, Marcus said, winking at Oliver, when your mom is ready. Catherine felt her heart expand in her chest at the consideration in those words, at the implicit respect in letting her control the pace of whatever this was. She took a deep breath, let the air fill her lungs with renewed determination, and nodded toward the doors. Let's go home, she said, testing the words. Let's go to our new home. They crossed the doors together, and the morning sun received them with warmth. The drive in the car was quiet. Oliver was pressed against the window, observing the city with new eyes, commenting on every interesting building and every tree he saw. Catherine rode in the passenger seat, her hands intertwined in her lap, her gaze fixed on the road, but her mind clearly elsewhere. Marcus drove carefully, conscious of the preciousness of his cargo, and occasionally glanced at Catherine, studying her profile, memorizing every detail as if it were something that could vanish if he didn't pay enough attention. When they arrived at the modern building where Marcus lived, with its glass and steel facade shining under the sun, Catherine felt a pang of inadequacy. But when Marcus turned off the engine and looked at her with that gentle smile he had learned to recognize as genuine, the pang faded. "Welcome home," he said, as he helped Oliver out of the car. They went up to the loft in an elevator that Oliver declared magical because it had mirrors everywhere and didn't make noise when moving. When Marcus opened the door to the loft on the 15th floor and invited them to enter, Catherine froze at the threshold. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city and the harbor beyond. The furniture was minimalist and elegant, all in tones of grey, white, and light wood. There was modern art on the walls, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and a general sense of quiet luxury that Catherine had never experienced except in movies. "It's too much," she whispered, suddenly feeling very small in the midst of so much opulence. Marcus closed the door softly behind them and stood at her side. "It's just a space. What makes it a home are the people who inhabit it. And until yesterday, it was just an empty box where I occasionally slept." He touched her shoulder gently. "Come on, I'll show you your rooms." He guided Oliver down a hallway toward a room he had prepared that morning before going to the hospital. He had bought a new bed with navy blue and grey sheets, a bookshelf with some children's books, a lamp shaped like a rocket, and had left several toys still in their boxes so Oliver would have the joy of opening them. The boy let out a cry of pure happiness and ran toward the bed, jumping on it with childish abandon. Catherine watched from the doorway, tears rolling freely now, and Marcus stood next to her, their shoulders almost touching, sharing the moment of seeing a child be simply a child again. The room Marcus showed Catherine was across the hall, equally carefully prepared, though with a more adult touch. A queen-size bed with bedding in cream and soft green tones, a desk by the window, an empty closet waiting to be filled. "It's yours for as long as you need it," Marcus said, staying respectfully at the threshold. "And if there's anything you want to change, decorations, furniture, whatever, just tell me." Catherine entered slowly, touching the bedspread with trembling fingers, approaching the window to look at the view of the city that spread like a living map before her. From here she could see the streets where she had walked aimlessly, the corners where she had slept with Oliver curled against her, the plaza where she had fainted believing that would be her end. And now she was here, on this 15th floor in this beautiful room, with an extraordinary man who looked at her as if she were something precious and not a burden. "I don't know how to thank you, Lee," she said, turning toward him, her voice barely a thread of sound. "The words feel insufficient for what you've done for us." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but his eyes intense. "I don't want your gratitude, Catherine. I want your trust. I want you to believe this isn't going to disappear. I want you to let me know you, not as the woman I found at her worst moment, but as the complex and beautiful person I know you are beneath the trauma and pain. He took a step toward her. And I want time for you to know me too, to see if what we're building here is real or just two lonely people clinging to each other. Catherine nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his words. Time, she repeated, testing the concept. It's strange to have time again. On the streets there's no time, just survival moment to moment. But here, she looked around the room again, letting reality settle. Here we can breathe, we can plan, we can be. She approached him until only a few inches separated them, and with courage she didn't know she possessed, she lifted her hand and gently touched his cheek. Thank you for giving us back time, Marcus. Thank you for giving us back the possibility of a future. He covered her hand with his, maintaining the contact, and closed his eyes for a moment, simply feeling the warmth of her palm against his skin. When he opened them, there was renewed determination in his gaze. I'm going to take care of you both, he promised. Not as a savior or benefactor, but as someone who found meaning in you. As someone who wants to wake up each day knowing he matters to someone else. Catherine stood on her tiptoes and pressed a kiss on his cheek, just at the corner of his mouth. A gesture that was both promise and question. You already matter, she whispered against his skin. More than you maybe should after so little time. But the heart doesn't follow logical schedules, does it? Marcus let out a soft laugh, wrapping an arm around her waist. No, it definitely doesn't. The rest of the day passed in a delicate dance of establishing new routines. Marcus showed them how everything worked in the loft, from the heating system to the washer and dryer that Oliver found fascinating. They prepared lunch together in the huge kitchen, something simple but made with care. Grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, a fresh salad. Oliver insisted on setting the table, his little face serious with the concentration of giving each plate and fork the correct place. They sat down to eat, and for the first time in months for Catherine and Oliver, in years for Marcus, the food tasted like more than just sustenance. It tasted like family, like home, like belonging. After they ate, Oliver explored his new toys with delight, while Marcus and Catherine sat on the living room sofa, a respectful distance between them, but their hands almost touching on the cushion that separated them. What are you thinking? Marcus asked after a long, comfortable silence. Catherine smiled softly, her gaze on Oliver, who was building a tower with colorful blocks. I'm thinking about all the moments where I could have given up, all the cold nights where the pain was so great I wanted to simply close my eyes and not open them again. All the times I looked at Oliver and hated myself for not being able to give him more. She paused, her fingers finally finding Marcus's and intertwining. And I think about how each of those horrible moments brought me here, to this instant, and I wonder if maybe everything had to happen exactly this way. Marcus squeezed her hand, absorbing her words. I think the same thing, he admitted. I think about how I had given up on the idea of real connection, how I had accepted loneliness as a necessary price of success. And then I saw you at that bakery, and it was like the universe was shouting at me to wake up. He turned his body toward her, his expression vulnerable in ways he had never allowed himself to be with anyone. Catherine, I know it's too soon. I know I should probably take things slower, be more rational, but I can't ignore what I feel. He took both her hands in his, holding them as if they were something sacred. I thought I was just buying bread for you that morning. I thought I was making a small gesture of basic humanity. But the truth is I found what I didn't even know was missing from my life. His voice became deeper, more intense. I found purpose. I found joy. I found... He paused, gathering courage. I found someone I want to know more deeply every day. Someone who makes me want to be a better man. Someone who turns this empty loft into a home just by being in it. Catherine felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. The tears, those constant companions of recent days, returned. But this time they were tears of something so close to happiness she could barely name it without fear of scaring it away. Marcus Brennan. She said his full name with reverence, with tenderness, with an incipient love she barely dared recognize. I don't know what I did to deserve you crossing my path. I don't believe in coincidences, so maybe this was destiny, or God putting an angel at my darkest corner. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched, her eyes closed, simply breathing the same air. You scare me because you make me feel things I thought I would never feel again. You make me believe I can be more than a survivor. You make me imagine futures that include laughter and peace and maybe, just maybe, true love." She opened her eyes and looked at him from that intimate distance. "So give me time to catch up to you because I'm running toward you with everything I have. But I'm coming from very far behind. And when I finally arrive," she smiled a smile full of promise. "When I finally arrive, I want to give you a healed heart that's worth receiving." Marcus kissed her then, not on the lips but on the forehead, a chaste and deep kiss that was more commitment than passion. "We have all the time in the world," he whispered against her skin. "And I'm going to be here every step of the way while you heal, while you grow, while you become who you're meant to be. Because Catherine Morris, the only thing I'm absolutely sure of is that I want to be by your side when you wake each morning, and there's no greater certainty I need in this life." Oliver appeared running at that moment, oblivious to the weight of the moment he had interrupted, and launched himself onto the sofa between them. "Look what I built," he exclaimed, showing them a wobbly tower of blocks that was more enthusiasm than architecture. Marcus and Catherine surrounded him with their arms, and there on that sofa, with the afternoon sun filtering through the windows and bathing them in golden light, the three became the living image of what Oliver had drawn days ago in the hospital. A family not perfect, not traditional, not following any known manual, but real, authentic, and built on the most solid foundation that exists. Love born from the most improbable and pure encounter between two souls who had forgotten they were searching for each other. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks began to form a beautiful routine. Catherine found work at a cozy bookstore where her natural warmth made her the favorite employee. Oliver started school with a new uniform and backpack full of supplies, making friends and laughing with the carefreeness that only healed children can achieve. And Marcus, who had lived for work for so long, discovered the simple pleasure of arriving home and finding lights on, voices waiting for him, hugs that received him. He discovered that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in shared moments, in looks that say more than words, in a boy's hand taking his with absolute trust, in the goodnight kiss from a woman who had become his reason to breathe. 6 months later, on a spring evening when Boston bloomed with cherry blossoms and the air smelled like new beginnings, Marcus took Catherine and Oliver to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End. After the meal, as they walked along the waterfront watching the lights reflect on the harbor, Marcus stopped and knelt down on one knee. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth as Oliver clapped with excitement, somehow knowing what was happening. "Catherine Morris," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You and Oliver saved my life. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love, to matter. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Catherine whispered, then louder. "Yes, Marcus. Yes." He slid the ring, a simple but beautiful sapphire, onto her finger and stood to kiss her, truly kiss her for the first time. Oliver cheered and passers-by applauded, and in that moment everything that had been broken became whole. 1 year later, they stood together as a family in front of their friends and loved ones. Marcus had found his purpose, Catherine had found her home, and Oliver had found his father. What had started with a bag of bread and a stranger's kindness had become a love story that proved the most powerful truth, that we find what we need most when we stop looking and start seeing the people right in front of us. If this story moved you, if you believe that kindness can change lives and that love appears in the most unexpected places, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe and share your own story with our community. Have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness that changed your path? Have you been the stranger who helped someone in need? Tell us in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Because we're all connected in this beautiful, broken, hopeful world. And every story of compassion reminds us that love is always worth believing in.